Good evening. This is the Plymouth Charter Commission meeting in the Great Hall on June 6th. This meeting is a hybrid meeting, meaning it's in person here in the Great Hall as well as via a Zoom webinar. And it can be viewed live on the local government channels 15, Comcast, or 47, Verizon. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page on the town website. And Zoom attendees, for public comment, please use the raise hand icon on the lower portion of your screen. An in-person audience, for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. So we'll start tonight with a Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. We have Betsy Hall is on Zoom, and David Peck, I believe, is in transit, but won't be here tonight. He should be here Thursday. So since we're actually expecting our Collins team folks to log in here any moment, but we will proceed. Since our meeting of the 26th, we took the comments from that meeting and the changes that were voted to the provisions in Chapter 2. Michelle did a good job incorporating them into another latest draft of the charter, with our working draft of the charter. It's dated June 6th, and that's been sent out, and you have a copy in your packet. And there's also a memorandum number 5 from the Collins Group. And I welcome Michael Ward. And is that Pat? Yep, welcome, Pat. Yep, good to have you with us. So what I thought we would do tonight, we're pretty much finished with Chapter 2, which is the legislative branch, which runs from the town meeting, committee of precinct chairs, finance committee, and moderator. But tonight, we're going to spend the first 15 minutes or so just to tie a couple of loose ends back there. We're not going to actually conclude every single word. There will be a chance to come back to the charter before we deliver our draft in September and fix any little small things in parts of the charter that we've already covered. But tonight I just want to go back and be sure we have the concept straight in Chapter 2, that the votes are properly shown in the language, that the positions that some of the language represents is, as you remember, it was voted and it's in the minutes. And it's also summarized in the Collins memos. And once we finish with that, we will move on into Chapter 3, which is the other really substantive part of the charter. That will include the select board, the town manager, the various departments, and the planning department. And I was talking today with the Collins folks. I think we should discuss it tonight at some point, that the planning department may be worthy of its own chapter and not be sort of at the end of the executive branch. I think it's really important, and I think it does require a lot of work to beef it up in terms of the master plan committee, how planning works and so forth. So that, I hope, will become its own chapter as we proceed through Chapter 3. We're also thinking of some additional chapters, so I'd like to really get your thoughts about this. One would be on communications as a separate chapter. Another one would be on perhaps climate change, resilience, voting, climate change, all those issues related to that. A third one could be voting laws, And if you think of any other things that should have its own chapter, let's deal with them. As we get to the charter, the current charter, those later chapters, I felt were pretty much covered the last time we did a charter review. And they probably don't require a lot of attention. The way the referendum works, the recall, all those sections that later on in the charter. We'll go over them, but I don't see any major changes unless somebody has something you think needs to be fixed or addressed in those sections. So I listed tonight what I think are still the issues, and be sure we cover them right. I've got like 8 or 9 points. I just want to kind of hit each one and see if we're going to agree. A couple of them, Collins folks are going to comment on, and we'll just keep marching forward. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Bill, may I make a comment?
Betsy Hall.
Betsy Hall. Yes, my Fios is not working for some reason, so I'm not on my computer, I'm on my iPad. So in order to access both the working charter, both the working charter and the Collins comments, I'm going to get off the video and go into the Collins comments. I'll be hearing everything that everybody says. I won't be speaking. And if I decide at some point I'd like to speak, I'll come back on video, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Very good, appreciate that. So let's see, now, backing up back to chapter 2, there's a couple things I wanted to ask about here because it wasn't clear to me how we came out. Before I even do that, I talked briefly today with Collins about the definition section in the charter, which is in chapter 1. And they're having their people look at the definitions generally to see if some of them need to be modernized or updated or reworded. So we'll deal with the definitions later when they're ready to give us their advice. One of those definitions, remember, was the annual town meeting. That will be included in that particular discussion. So moving on to chapter 2, the first question I had was this issue of re-precincting. And what exactly was the vote taken? Because I read the language that Michelle prepared and also that the Collins people prepared regarding how that worked. Remember, there was going to be a 10-member committee to assist, as it would be called the re-precincting advisory board, 10 members, 5 appointed by the select board and 5 by the committee of precinct chairs. What was said, what was the discussion regarding whether a person would be on that from each precinct to the extent possible? And was that person to be a town meeting member or not? Because it's not, I couldn't tell from my notes whether that was part of what was actually decided. Does anybody remember that particular point?
Definitely not whether they were a town meeting member or not. I don't think that was.
So they didn't have to be a town meeting member?
No, definitely
Okay.
not.
I couldn't find anywhere where we said that, so that's good.
Yeah.
Is the language in neither the select board nor the committee of precinct chairs shall appoint multiple members from the same precinct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
we
the language is here on the documents.
Frank, I can't hear you.
I'm saying the language seems to be here that we agreed
Right.
on.
And it doesn't say anything about town meeting members. Right?
You mean against?
Well, it doesn't say it had to be a town meeting member from each
We
precinct.
weren't identifying it just from
No.
the general population, anyone.
Right.
Yeah,
Could be any
definitely
citizen
general
from the-
population. It
citizen
definitely
who
did not
lives in
say
the
that.
precinct. Okay, so they think that's fine the way we had it. The other comment I have on the language that was put in front of us here on that was that it started off by talking about this advisory board for the 10-year project. And then the second paragraph says 5 years after the completion of the 10-year of the re-precincting undertaken for the 10-year, there would be a 5-year review. And I think it should start from this 2022 10-year, not the next 10-year. So I think that language could be corrected or fixed, so we don't have to wait 10 years from now to actually have the next 5 year after that. It would be 5 years from now. So I think, Mr. Pizer, did you want to say something about the 5-year review? I don't think you were here when we were discussing that.
Yeah, I apologize to my fellow members, but I was, I simply couldn't get here last week, and I was on the road, so I couldn't be online. The 10-year review is based on census numbers from the federal government. A 5-year review is based on nothing. There's nothing to review. I mean, you can rethink about what we got 10 years before, but given the size and the history of Plymouth and the likelihood that it's going to continue there'll be changes, we'll know that there are changes, and we will have no idea in any effective way where those changes are. So anybody can review anything, but to include the town clerk in a formal review in any process, it's really, I'm sorry to say, a waste of the town clerk's time. So while it's a good idea for people to look at it and have anecdotal feelings about, we noticed that there's a new apartment house going up there and probably maybe, but you can't have a committee reviewing lines without numbers. Thank you.
Okay? Bill, go ahead.
So the clerk, we don't do a census every 10 years. We do, the town does the town does not do a census the town does do, the town will count people in between the federal census.
With all apologies to my former position as town clerk, the numbers from the town census are not of any value in terms of re-precincting.
Okay, all right. So during this re-precincting, the federal numbers were late coming out, and we operated from our original, the only information that we had at the time. They tell us, the state instructed us to move forward because these federal numbers weren't coming out.
We didn't start until the federal numbers came out.
Right.
We cannot ever.
Didn't they, but hang on a second. But early in the year, the federal government did say, hey, we're not gonna have these numbers out until late, but you should start to, I think it was the state came back and said, you should start doing an exercise. They were recommending some investigation into it, but my point is this, that Plymouth is the fastest growing town in New England. Our population is growing, and our precincts find themselves in situations during election cycles where we are over the limit. We know we're over the limit for a precinct in terms of how many people should be voting there by a state regulation. In the Pine Hills, it did exceed the state. Let me just finish so we did run into an issue where we had a precinct that had more voters in it than would be allowed by the state. The state is giving us guidance that we should have 2,500 people in a precinct, and we were far exceeding that, which led to lots of problems where we had lines out the door, we had police down there, we had machines breaking down, we had elevators not working. It became an issue down there that, thank God for the 2020 census, so we could sort it out and straighten it out. My thought would be, what is the harm in looking at it at 5 years to see if there's any problems existing out there that might require some sort of further evaluation?
Okay, I think you're confusing two issues. The limit that the state places of 4,000 voters is for the day on which you make your precincts. The state well understands that precincts can grow and shrink in the intervening time. So the fact that the Pine Hills, the precinct 15 of the previous re-precincting, the fact that that precinct got big broke no rules. It was unfortunate. It was unfortunate that there were lines in precincts, but that has nothing to do with redrawing the lines of the precincts. What could happen, if the select board so chose, is there could be sub-precincts. which would be all of the people are still in precinct 15, but these people vote here and those people vote there. That can be done, but you cannot even think about redrawing lines in between the 10-year period. So a 5-year review is not something that's going to be useful to the town.
Okay, I was, I know, but I was talking and I got stopped there. Larry jumped in. And because I wanted to hear what he had to say. But my point is that there are other towns that are doing this analysis. There are no other towns doing it that you know of. No one else is looking at it in between there's no other town in the Commonwealth looking at the voting burden in between the two, between the 10 years. No
That's
one's-
correct. There is
Okay.
not.
All right, so this is groundbreaking.
It's groundbreaking because the direction in which it goes, you need new numbers in order to have new considerations.
Okay, can we just address that?
And
Just the discussion, with all due respect, Larry, the discussion was going around that we were kind of behind the 8 ball when we came to the 10 years. And we didn't want to be there again. So the discussion was, why not look at the numbers, see where they're trending, so that we can take some of the stuff away from the clerk, so the clerk isn't sitting there going, how do I do this after 10 years? So hold on. The discussion was, why don't we look at it somewhere in between? Maybe it's more than 5, less than 5, but start to get some of those numbers so that we can look at it, so that we're not coming up at 10 years going, what do we do?
Mike, I have 2 questions. One is, what numbers? There are no new numbers until the feds come out with their census. That's the problem.
Okay.
We don't have,
Okay.
you know, the Donahue Center, I believe it is, at UMass, Amherst, they make some sort of projections. If I showed you the map that they sent early in 2020, you'd be horrified. Not because they're bad, it's just that they didn't have the numbers that were going to come out and be the numbers that we need.
Right, but
There
I-
aren't any numbers.
I'm not talking about doing maps. What we were talking about is a town census or getting some numbers, because we knew 5 years in between that precinct 15 was way big.
Okay, I think we batted it back and forth. What's the harm in having that section in there, for whatever it's worth? I mean, we know people are gonna be registering to vote. I mean, there are other indications of what's happening to the population and where it's concentrating without precise, I think you're being very precise.
No, he's not
right?
speaking into it.
Numbers that can be used for redistricting. But we're talking about something more general, just looking for a trend, where the population is moving to, shifting to, whatever. So there'll be some kind of early start when we get to the 10-year.
I think that Bill was on the re-precincting group, and I think he understands, Joe is also sitting in the audience, and he understands that what we did had to do not only with where people were moving, but how to get these people to a convenient voting location. There were so many pieces that go into it that wrestling's correct. It was a really difficult job, but if you don't have the numbers, you're just absolutely spinning your wheels for no purpose. You want the commission, if you want a commission to look at these things, that's okay. But the idea that this commission is going to make recommendations to the select board, what possible recommendations can they make to the select board? That I don't understand.
Maybe you're getting caught up in the verbiage. Maybe it would be,
All right, why don't we take our hand between now and the next meeting, see if we can redraft this, so there's a little more of general comment here that so it still is a useful exercise in having it here. And we use it for what it is. I mean, I see no harm in having it here.
It just to follow up, I feel it's very important that we look at this. Plymouth is struggling at different times, getting information in on a timely manner and getting it out there. Right now, on election night, if we weren't putting out like a spreadsheet, it would be difficult to get these numbers in a timely manner. I feel like that we need to be looking at precincts, we need to be collecting information, getting it out rapidly, because the longer it takes for people to vote or to experience that, or the election results themselves, that undermines the public confidence in the electoral process. So there's a heightened awareness around it, and I think that there's an opportunity at least for leave this language in there so that people can take a break every 5 years and look
Okay,
at the
subject to
circumstance.
seeing some revised language, does anybody want to reverse this vote right now, tonight? David?
I think there are problems here. Many of the problems that Bill has mentioned, they're valid concerns, but some of those problems occurred because the election wasn't held in a town-owned building. So in a town-owned building, you wouldn't be dealing with an elevator. You wouldn't be dealing with long lines because it's a bigger spot to vote. And there seems to be controversy here as to the effectiveness of this. If you're just counting for the sake of counting, I would personally be in favor of striking this whole paragraph.
So, wrestling.
I think we're getting caught up to Larry's point about giving recommendations to the select board. I think the word report would be better than recommendations. I think that what we discussed last time is we were talking about how to make it not a monumental task, that we could be looking at trends and be a little more proactive, so that when it came time to do it, it would be less of a laborious process. I'm not saying that, I don't see this as this body, says to the selectmen, hey, we've got to redistrict right now. But I do see them saying, hey, if we're looking back, if this commission had been in place, it could have said, hey, we really need to look at 15, we've got X amount, we're, seeing the trends. It's just talking about trends in between, giving a report so that when we come to the end, it's not like, okay, we're starting from scratch, that's all.
I support the idea of getting ahead of the curve if we could.
Of course.
What we did for this most recent re-precincting, I went to the select board in 2018 and told them that I expected that we would have 2 new precincts. And I told them where I expected to have 2 new precincts, and had the state rep people not stepped in, we probably would have ended up with that. However, even with that information, that would not have affected the work that the re-precincting working group did. Because while I knew where the general places were, when you came down to it, you had nothing to do until the numbers arrived. And the fact that I said, I think they might be 2 new precincts, saved us no time whatsoever.
Okay, Bill, why don't you
Okay. So,
make a final point here?
okay. I don't think this language in here harms the circumstance. It allows the town after 5 years to meet some challenges that might be coming down the road. Yes, hypothetically, it was in an elevator in a building and we've solved that problem. But as the town grows and more voters show up, I think it wouldn't hurt to take that moment every 5 years to put together a group to advise the selectmen if there's anything that can be dealt with. Larry has a point. There is no census. I get it. But there are other issues that do arise that we might want to start simulating those activities to get ready for this census and to adjust the precincts. Just like the Donahue Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst puts out these maps. Earlier this year, they didn't have the numbers, but they were telling us to simulate activities to get used to this process, so when the numbers came out that we were more prepared for it. So I think it would be reassuring to people to look at this process to see if there's anything that we could do to accommodate the growth that we're expanding, and to make the electoral process in Plymouth more welcoming in people's voices being heard. If there's any frustration out there, we can respond to it at 5 years and not wait 10.
Okay.
I would like to, I'm going to second the motion of
Well,
Mr.
wait,
Malaguti.
before we ask for the motion, does Collins have anything to say about this? Mike?
Nothing significant at the moment, other than that, if the decision is to keep it in and change it, my understanding is you'd want to change recommendations to report and potentially look at other ways to take the language down a notch so that it is more about prepping for the decennial census as opposed to doing its own interim review. I mean, I guess the only other thing I'll say is to that end, if that's really where this ends up, then you might even consider making it closer to 10 years. So it's, not less than 3 years before, as opposed to 5 years after, something like that.
Okay, does everybody want to make a motion? David?
Well, I'll make a motion, and then I just want to discuss it too, but I'll move that we strike this entire paragraph.
Is that seconded? Larry Pizer seconds it. Any further discussion?
Yeah, right here.
David?
As Larry said, you're creating a commission that has no meaning. As Bill said, you'd like to get ahead of the curve. And as Larry just said, he could predict where the numbers were going just by looking at the number of voters in each precinct. So this paragraph is totally unnecessary.
Okay, ready for the vote?
I want to comment as well. It's my understanding that this paragraph is there partially because the legislature was left out of the process of contributing to this. Isn't that correct? So I think the language should be revised, but I think I understand what Mr. Pizer is saying, and I know ultimately you can't draw these precincts until you have those hard numbers. But in the interim, you can accomplish both assuring people that feel that the precincts are drawn incorrectly that they can be heard, and you can get a little bit of a head start on the discussions that will take place and give the legislature a role in those discussions, which they haven't had. Otherwise, this was going to happen, I believe, without this process as it was forced to happen, we were going to get those 2 precincts that Larry predicted without any discussion or whatever, and as it turned out, we had 3. I'm not saying Larry was wrong, I'm not saying 3 was right. I'm saying the process should have been more open. I agree with Bill on that. So I think we should revise, and I would vote against this article.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Is there any further discussion? I think you've heard it back and forth, wrestling.
Just quickly, Frank is spot on. If you go back to our notes of that last discussion, we were talking about, yes, Larry, you had those forecasts, but towards the end of the process, there was a lack of transparency as the town saw it. And this would give the opportunity, we're talking about, one of the reasons we're here is the town wants more transparency and more involvement. And this would definitely give that to them.
All right, it's ready for the vote. So all in favor of David Malaguti's motion, which is to strike this paragraph that refers to the 5 years in its entirety, please raise your hand. So I see 2 votes. All opposed? Oh, Betsy, she just raised it.
I voted for the motion.
Okay, so that's 3 in favor of the motion. And looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got 8 of us here. Okay, 5 opposed to the motion. Motion does not carry. So be it. But I do think it would be good to do a little redrafting of that paragraph before the next meeting and see if we can make it more palatable. The next point.
Bill, may I about that section, please?
Pardon me?
The word multiple. May I say something about that section, please? Do one section where it says, neither the select board nor the committee of precinct chairs shall appoint multiple members from the same precinct. I think that's vague, and I think, I'm not exactly sure, rereading it now, what exactly that sentence means. Does it mean that the select board will not appoint more than one from a precinct, and then the committee of chairs won't appoint anybody from that precinct? I think that needs more work, that sentence. Neither the select board nor the committee of precinct chairs shall appoint multiple members.
Thank you, Betsy. I see the Collins folks shaking their heads. They're in agreement. Perhaps a little more precision there. I think I interpreted it the way Betsy just said, but let's be a little more precise what you meant by not multiple members by each of these boards. Next point had to do with, was in section 2-2-4. Yes, 2-2-4. It had to do with the record kept of town meeting. And the language in the charter that's being proposed says that the select board shall ensure that there's a video recording of the town meeting created and preserved and stored. And then there's another paragraph, it's either in addition to it or as an alternative, which says that the select board should ensure that detailed minutes shall be created, preserved, and stored. So I take it, well, the question is whether these paragraphs should be cumulative or should they be either or. So let's take some comment on that. I think there already is a record archived if you look up an old town meeting, but it doesn't have what everybody says. It just basically says the motion, who amended it, and what the result is. So let's talk about these two subparagraphs that have been drafted. Wesley?
Yeah, I remember the discussion really revolving around there had to be a record. And I think we talked about there had to be a record, right. And then we kind of got into the weeds about whether it had to be written, and then we said, well, we've got a video of it if you want to go to the exact stuff. So personally, I think the video's enough, but that's just me.
I think the one thing that was missing from the discussion was what we already have. If anybody does, like, I went back to try to see what happened at a town meeting a couple of years ago, and there is a record of that town meeting, and it came down to even the detail of a particular article and how it got amended. It didn't talk about what every town meeting member said, but it showed the result as the town meeting was progressing, what happens to a specific article as it evolved, and then it goes on to the next article.
I do remember that I do remember that we did say we had to be better at archiving the videos of town meeting, that
So the video was
the town had to.
Another way of doing it, right?
Right, the town had to make sure that those were archived, not just at PAC TV, but the town had a record of every video.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the paragraph that's drafted here as to the video is correct. I think that's the way we discussed it. The question is whether we also want to put in the other one in addition to that one, the one about the minutes. And Mr. Pizer.
I think we should recognize that the formal record of the town meeting is the town clerk's minutes as produced. I think we're doing an overlap on this one. If we have the video recording of town meeting and somebody wants to know how the meeting proceeded, who said what, it's there. We've guaranteed that it's there because we said there has to be a video recording. And therefore, the description of what the town clerk ought to include in the minutes should, since we said at a minimum, the warrant articles and the action taken on each warrant article, which includes all the amendments and the motions to close debate and things like that. And I think that I'm concerned if we put a summary of the discussion there, that we're muddying the minutes And what we want, I mean, when the town clerk goes to the Attorney General, for example, with a bylaw, the town clerk should have just what the Attorney General is looking for, because if you have more than that, it's going to confuse the issue. So I would recommend, I'm perfectly fine with the idea of including the fact that the town clerk has to produce minutes, and that the minutes have to be stored in a location. They already are. We're saying we'll continue to do that, but that we leave the words "a summary of the discussion" out.
Right. I don't think we need a vote on this. Is that, do we have a consensus?
Right,
We don't
wasn't.
need a summary of the discussion on the written part, because you can always watch the video and find out who exactly said what.
Well, excuse me, I was one of the people that felt passionate about this particular issue, and originally came about my interest and concern from a perspective of a journalist. When I went looking in the official record, I couldn't find what I wanted. The summary was not enough because of what I was looking for. And that kind of thing comes up on a regular basis on every board meeting as well. If you don't have accurate minutes that truly reflect what went on, you don't have, I think, open meeting. And so this being such an important thing, the whole open meeting, I feel there needs to be a more detailed record. And though, I don't know if you can have it both ways, Larry, that is, you can say, this is the record you go check with, but this is the official record. Because what would happen is you'd say, look, I found this instance in the actual town meeting in the videotape that suggests that this was improper, or that was not the intent of the of town meeting, but the official record would not reflect that. And then you're out on a, it's an intent.
If I may, there are not a whole lot of places where the town clerk is really powerful. The minutes that the town clerk produces are the records of town meeting, and anything else that's there is interesting and maybe useful for journalists, but the record of town meeting is what the clerk says the record of town meeting is.
You're making my argument, I think.
Well, perhaps, but the purpose of those minutes is to have an official record of town meeting. And I think that it's important that we don't muddy the official record, especially since we're producing the other material that exists, the video recording, so that if people are interested in the tone, they can go there. It's not going to change the official record of town meeting. The official record will be what the clerk's statement is.
Yeah, just, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Obviously, requiring the town to archive the video is going to be something we can rely on. We have this 2-2-4 that has language touching on the things that the clerk has always kept in the annual report, correct? And these minutes that, some summary of minutes. Now, I've been to other towns and other meetings and other bodies, public bodies, and they have a court reporter just typing everything out, and that's their record. And so it wouldn't be such a burden. I'm not asking for the town clerk to be sitting up there with a feather pen scrubbing through the town meeting, but how burden would it be some to have a court reporter and they're just reporting the, just typing away? I mean, I've seen it at council meetings, I've seen it at, other towns where they'll have somebody reporting in this manner, and that information is available to somebody.
Larry, do you ever?
That might solve Frank's concern of being able to go back and see something in writing.
I don't have any objection to additional records. What I'm saying is that the record that the town clerk is going to produce ought to be clean and mean. It needs to say what the motion was and what the result of that motion was, so that future generations, including not only attorneys general, but developers and all the other people who ask for certified copies of town meeting records, get, this is what happened definitively. So add anything, anything else you want. But as far as the town clerk's minutes are concerned, they ought to say, it should say at a minimum warrant articles and the action taken on each warrant article.
Wrestling,
So, Larry, I think we need to separate the official report and the report of town meeting. I think that's an important differentiate. How often in the clerk's report does it say discussion ensued? So for example,
Never.
okay. So if Wrestling Brewster got up and asked a question, that would be recorded in that report?
That would be recorded on the videotape. That's where,
No, but I'm asking about the report.
the only thing
Okay.
that is there is motions
Yep.
and actions on motions.
Okay, because I'm going towards Frank's point, because intent of town meeting, is lost with, we voted on this and it was a yay or nay, 2/3. And I totally get where, there's some minutes that take down every single thing that somebody said, and it's laborious and not pertinent. But on the other hand, there's some that don't take the intent into point. I'm listening to Frank's concerns and seeing where it could be inferred, it could, the intent of town meeting could be lost in some.
If I may.
Yeah, please.
I think that what you're saying is really very important. If a bunch of people say a bunch of things and it's written down, you're still going to come down to the point where the motion is stated and the result of the motion is 47 votes to 43 votes, it passes, or it didn't reach 2/3, or whatever that is. And your record will not be as clear as if you just had the basic material. I agree with you that there are people who are going to be interested that a minority of people, had some ideas and they weren't accepted by town meeting, and this is the third time, whatever. But we've solved that by having the video record, so that
Yeah,
anyone who wants to know this has a place to go.
this is exactly the discussion we had at the last meeting and why we added to the charter the video thing. Because nothing's better than a video. You do a court reporter, they get it wrong. I hate reading transcripts. A video to see it, somebody's really interested in it, and there it is.
And personally, I'm okay with this if we feel it's strong enough that those videos are archived by the town and it's not just up to PAC TV to keep those videos. I'm okay with that, because the problem in the past was, okay, I want to find out why this passed or didn't pass, and I got to go to PAC TV and string through things to find it. If we feel that it's strong enough in the charter that the town must archive these in a efficient manner, I'm okay with that.
Comment, Mike?
I propose maybe a compromise here that could get at, I think, a little bit of what everyone is going for. If we deleted a summary of the discussion and replaced it with, I don't know what the language would be, something that noted in the text minutes approximately where in the video log that discussion, that warrant article comes up. So that someone could go to the minutes and say, oh, Article 7 is approximately 8 minutes or 43 minutes in. Then they can very quickly get to exactly the video content they need to assess what they're trying to assess, without the concerns of the summary of discussion being muddied or concerns about accuracy, and without the cost of a court recorder.
Okay, Mike, you add those words there, if you would, in the next draft. We'll take out summary of discussion and then make a link back to the video. Got it? Okay, thank you.
Move along.
Bill, did you have something for me?
Yeah, just one thing. I want to go back to 2-2-3. It says, "The clerk shall mail copies of the notice or places of residence or provide mailing addresses of all representative town meeting members."
Right.
Should we add email addresses when the clerk's collecting information? Should they get the email addresses too? I think that technology's with us for a while. I know things kind of phase out.
I'm still trying to track down emails.
Right.
Are you all in favor of email addresses? Yes? Consensus? Yes?
If
Okay.
if I could just say
Yes,
that
go
my
ahead.
proposal was, where it said not mailing addresses, it was supposed to say email
Okay, good.
addresses. That was exactly what I was doing.
mailing an email.
And the reason I
Right.
said when available.
Right.
Is that, all of the email addresses that are available are out there.
Right.
But there are a bunch of people who haven't yet told us.
Okay.
Okay, we got it, great.
So it'll be
Thank you.
mailing and available email addresses.
Right. It'll say both, got it. Okay, next. Next is the
Section 3.
town meeting, the third town meeting, which is on page 9 of the charter of the master copy. It's 2-4-1. The only question I had here was, the wording, I think, works. This was going to be this optional third town meeting. Did we firmly decide it was going to be in January? Or could it be a summer town meeting in June?
Hence my saying as needed during the discussion, as needed.
As needed.
But, no, but I thought the point was, David, that there'd be a point in time in the calendar when the decision would be made whether or not a third town meeting is necessary. Not any time in the year. You can always have a town meeting as needed. Wrestling?
Right, I think the discussion was gearing more towards, we needed to say that it was going to happen unless
Yeah.
nothing was going on,
Right.
not if we need it. we
Right,
would
so the
have
question I have is
Yeah.
January the right time, just after the holidays, or could it be done in June more painlessly? Larry?
January better.
I'm sure the answer is January. June is already vacation time, and we're going to have a problem getting town meeting reps together. And January, I don't think it's a good idea to put this in, but I'm not vehement about it. But if there's going to be one, in January,
All right,
that
so
would
it's
be
fine
the
the way it
time.
is. Everybody okay with January? Got it. Moving along in the charter, just a note on page 12 to the town meeting precinct caucuses. The language was added that the precinct chair shall be able to call a caucus meeting for any purpose in furtherance of town meeting as needed. That's in 2-6-2.
2-2? 262.
Right.
All right.
Okay, moving along through the sections, the next section is the moderator on page 14. And you see there in 2-8-1, the whole paragraph about how the moderator with this language would be nominated at the beginning of the spring town meeting, and this wording would say you would be elected at the end of the spring town meeting, but not take office until the fall town meeting. The Collins folks had some concerns about that and did some thinking about it and wrote a page or two in their memo. So why don't we start off with them giving us their take on that particular provision. This is 2-8-1.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just start by saying we heard and entirely understood the frustrations that were that raised at the last meeting, and certainly, we understand the desire to try and take some corrective action against on some of the issues that came up around how the moderator runs town meeting. I would just simply say the more we discussed it, the more potential issues and problems with this methodology we foresaw. I would say, on one level, there's a set of operational implementation concerns that we would share, that nominating a moderator and then going a whole town meeting and then electing that moderator presents some potential political challenges if there are multiple candidates, if people are treating the meeting itself as an opportunity to campaign either for or against the moderator who's attempting to run the meeting. It's complicated enough without that dynamic hanging over. And then at a legal level, the only representative town meeting we have found where the moderator is selected by town meeting is Saugus. And that language appears to predate the Home Rule Amendment to the Constitution, and therefore it may not have been ever reviewed by the Attorney General, and so might not even pass muster. We're not entirely sure. It's a little bit gray. And even so, Saugus, obviously, I think what was already come up before, has the smallest representative town meeting in the Commonwealth at 55. So it's a very different dynamic than a town meeting, representative town meeting of Plymouth size. So bottom line, we put it in here. If this is the will of the commission, we understand. At the same time, we thought it was important to air our concerns and let you know we understand the problems. And if you want, we can try and come up with some other ways to tackle either in the charter or recommendations that would be outside of the charter but could go in the report that could address this issue. Pat, is there anything else you want to add to that those comments?
I think Mike summed it up, but I just wanted to add there is a provision in Mass General Law that indicates that at a town meeting, until a moderator is chosen, the clerk shall preside. So I'm not sure if that would conflict with your ideas of having nominations taken at the beginning of the meeting and votes at the end. And just furthermore, there's only one town that does do it this way, and part of the reason for that are all of these both political and practical points that come up where somebody who suddenly decides to become a moderator at that meeting might not have the know-how or the practical knowledge to go forward with that, where someone who has run for election to be town moderator may have that in mind and be prepared and go forward. We'd love to answer any questions or try to deal with the issues that you've raised that have brought this new town moderator approach up in any other way. So I guess what we want to understand from you is really what specific concern is the overriding need to change it from elected to appointed by town meeting, and whether that concern that you have is going to outweigh all of these potential pitfalls in changing the charter.
Before we discuss it, I have a question, Pat. Is there something in the state statute that says the moderator generally is elected by the electorate?
It does not say that specifically in the state statute. It does say that in the guidance bulletins that the Commonwealth puts out, the guidelines for town meeting, that generally they're elected. It also states in town meeting time, it kind of contemplates, of course, in Massachusetts, the the town moderator is elected and not appointed by town meeting members. It almost assumes that that's the case, even though there's no prohibition listed in either of those.
I guess my question is, anybody ever researched why that came about? Because in historic times, the moderator, I think, probably was elected by the meeting he was presiding over. But at some point along the way, the general practice switched to the moderator being elected by the entire electorate. And I wondered if there was any specific history on what happened to create that, that major change.
Well, I didn't find any written history on that. Some of the things that have changed since then have been larger town meetings and the need for a more professional town manager to handle the rules along the way. But I did not see any. This has changed, but there's no real guideline on when and how and why. But there definitely has been a sea change since the historic beginning of town meeting.
Thank you.
So one of the things that you did touch on is how you would elect them. The idea was to elect them in as I was saying, that you pointed out this concern you had about electing someone at a spring town meeting and having them assume the responsibilities at fall town meeting, whether you nominate them, maybe there's some way of doing it in a more clear and concise way where you elect them at the end, and you keep it all to that point so that that it wouldn't be a distraction from I was just thinking during the Springtown meeting what you would do to every 3 years to appoint a new town moderator, that the thought was that it was to say something to the nature of that at that town meeting you would elect them and they would assume the responsibility in the fall. How we do it logistically that doesn't cause any confusion in terms of clerks having to assume responsibilities, I don't think we'd be at a point of ever not having a moderator under that scenario. Town meeting would convene and they would do their business, and at the end they would elect someone for the next 3 years, something as simple as that. I think that would solve the confusion that you thought by nominating the beginning and finishing up at the end. But I do believe that the thought process was that having the body elect the moderator would give some sort of continuity towards the body itself and its deliberations and attention played to its concerns as it moved forward. But that was the thought process behind it. But I do believe that how we elect the moderator can be done in a manner that's not distracting to that town meeting.
Betsy, did you have a comment? Go ahead,
Yes,
Betsy.
I have a question for Collins Center. Does every other town that has town meeting, does every other town have the moderator elected by the whole town?
Every town except for Saugus.
That's the only one, so they're elected by the town, because I spoke to some
Every
residents.
representative town meeting.
Right,
except for
representative,
Saugus.
yeah.
There may be a couple of small towns with open town meetings where essentially they are being elected by the entire population because anyone can vote at town meeting. But when you're looking at specifically representative town meetings, Saugus is the only one that elects the moderator at town meeting. And as Mike said, that's a little bit of a different dynamic. That's a smaller town meeting. There are about 50 or 55 representatives in Saugus.
Speaking to residents, people said to me, I have no idea what a town moderator does. I go in, there's only one person on the ballot. I don't bother to check it off because they're going to be elected anyway. So it seems like there's a conflict between right way to elect a moderator for town meeting and having people know what they're even voting for. So I think we need to find a solution to that. I can tell you one thing I was unhappy with as a former committee of precinct chairs as well as a town meeting member. And that is that the committee of precinct chairs years ago started something called the presentation forum. And the committee of precinct chairs would ask people to come in from the town employees or, departments, or maybe it was a private presenter. But we would ask them to come in and we would ask them questions. And there was a time when we didn't have debates so much as information. So that's why it was called a presentation forum. We asked people to come in and, come in and tell us why you need this money or what's going on. And then a couple of years ago, I think it was, the town moderator said, I'm going to do the presentation forum now. And people said, wait, that's something the Committee of Precinct Chairs does. And that was not heard. And so now there's two presentation forums, one by the moderator and one by the Committee of Precinct Chairs. And it's gotten quite confusing. And a lot of people were unhappy with the moderator for making that decision outside of Committee of Precinct Chairs and the Committee of Precinct Chairs not being involved in that decision. So that's just one example of my own memory of times that people have thought, wow, the moderator is taking on a responsibility here and not listening to the town meeting members. So I think we do need to find a way to solve this. We do, because if people are electing a moderator, now our present moderator is wonderful, and he's been a town moderator for a long time, does a huge amount of work, and I don't want to take any away from him, but he is going to retire someday, and then we'll need a new town moderator. And who will run for that? Who will be qualified? All of those questions are going to come up at that time that we're talking about tonight. And so it'll go out to the electorate. They'll still have no idea, probably mostly who this person is or why they're running or what they do. So I think we need to find a solution.
Wrestling.
Yeah, just a couple questions. Do all of the towns that have town meeting go by town meeting times? Or do some of them go by Robert's rules? Do you know at all?
They're different. Town
Okay.
meeting gets to choose.
Okay, so there are some that go by Robert's rules instead of town meeting times?
But,
Correct.
Okay.
but what-
And I think going off what Betsy's saying, I think the reason that we are where we are on this is because the moderator is supposed to be not at the direction, I don't know if the word's direction, but is supposed to moderate the meeting for town meeting. Town meeting's supposed to have, for lack of a better term, the power. And I think that we feel that a lot of power has shifted. I think, that the presentation forum was taken over by the moderator, and the form of town meeting has been taken over by the moderator. And I'm continually talking to precinct chairs about town meeting taking back that power. Or responsibility might be the better word. So I think that's why we are where we are in nominating the the moderator, because we feel that we need some more direction towards town meeting having that responsibility. So that's why we are where we are.
But just a couple of points. Wrestling, regarding town meeting time, if you read through there, it seems to me that the book is written for all of New England, because it frequently will differentiate the way they do it in Massachusetts and the way they do it in New Hampshire or Maine, and it's different. And I don't know how they come out on this particular issue. Pat said that it says Massachusetts, that's the way it's done. In the same paragraph, did it say how it's done elsewhere in the other states in New England? But to get to Betsy's point, the fact that the moderator is aggregating power to himself, perhaps, that to me was a failure in the charter by somebody not standing up and saying that the Committee of Precinct Chairs is supposed to do the presentation for. I was just appalled that nobody objected, and all of a sudden it happened.
We
The
did.
moderator's doing it, even though the whole essence was that the precinct chairs was supposed to do it and always had done it. The moderator is going to, people move into vacuums and take over things. That's why you have a charter. I don't think having him elected by the town meeting is going to make any difference. He's not going to be scolded by the town meeting and maybe not reelected. I don't think that's the way it's going to happen. So the other point that I think, and the reason maybe the moderator is certainly now by custom elected by the whole electorate, is that when the moderator is elected by the entire populace, it brings town meeting kind of into the general daylight, that here, it's not kind of a rogue group led by its own little its own little leader. It's a organized representatives with a leader that is a town leader. So I think that you can make a powerful argument on why it is done that way, rather than have the town meeting itself electing its own moderator, and going off, because it gives, I think, you can argue, standing, a higher level of standing in the general populace if you have a moderator that ties the town meeting together, and also the moderator, and this is where you have to be careful so it doesn't go too far, but the moderator is kind of the liaison, as we've seen it with other boards. We're hoping that the COPC is going to take over a lot of that function, become the liaison rather than the moderator. But, this is not an open and shut case by a long shot, either way, either side. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Couple of points. One, there are multiple parts to the moderator's role in town meeting. Sure, we all see him at town meeting, and that is one role. And it seems to me that that role can be governed by charter statements of what he can do and what town meeting can override him with. There's a second role that the moderator has, and that is in the organizing of town meeting. And having gone to, I believe, 75 motions meetings over the years, the importance of the moderator gathering the players of town meeting, the town manager, the finance director, the clerk, the planning director, a couple of others, the CPC chair some of the time could have been, the superintendent of schools. What happens at that meeting makes town meeting work. And I have a concern on the one hand of a moderator that's too strong, and a concern on the other hand of a moderator who is so weak that town meeting is out of control. I'm not sure how many of you remember a town meeting in which the moderator stepped down because he said that he had an apparent conflict of interest, and therefore asked the assistant moderator to step up, and town meeting ate the assistant moderator for lunch. It was an awful occurrence, and I sat beside him and cringed. So it seems to me that if we take all of these pieces together, we need someone who's ready to do the organizing. We need somebody who is strong enough to have town meeting operate in a reasonably efficient manner, because I think people would be turned off if it just kind of went off in multiple directions and there was no control over things. And the answer, I think, therefore, is put in any controls that you want over the town manager, but by all means elect him moderator, but by all means elect him every 3 years at the town election.
Frank wants to talk.
First, a point about what Larry just said. I don't understand how electing him gives him any of that authority or clarity or balance. You could get somebody completely unqualified, a popular individual elected who doesn't know his way around town meeting at all. So I don't think electing gives them any sort of new insights or balance or whatever. I would say that at first I was maybe just intuitively against this proposal because I thought, I don't want to put it in the worst terms, the rats running the ship, so to speak. I don't mean to be negative about town meeting, that's why. Give me a different metaphor, but.
As long as the ship's not the Mayflower.
But then I was convinced after a few conversations outside of the meeting with other people and residents that this would be a way of giving more, again, authority and responsibility to town meeting as an equal institution, and that eventually won me over. But when I look at the and I see if I see it on my computer here. When I look at the language, there's one little change I might make, because it does say that before town meeting is adjourned, members shall elect one member. I think that we should have the ability to make it somebody outside of town meeting. It says one member, so I'm taking that to read a member of town meeting. Oh, good. So if that was changed, so it could be an individual with, ultimate credibility and experience, and not just taken from somebody in town meeting, because I don't necessarily think that town meeting representatives are going to have the experience necessary to do that. I'm sure there are some individuals, by dint of their long-term experience and other background, could do that, but it might be a little harder to find there.
Mr. Chairman?
Bill?
I think that would solve the concern that you might have, that you're not seeking the best and the brightest if you were to allow town meeting to nominate and elect someone, not other, could be someone at town meeting, could be somebody out beyond that. So, what was that?
For David?
Well, I hate to be a curmudgeon, but I know. I see this as cumbersome. I see this as somewhat confusing, because town meeting should deal with the matters coming before town meeting, and electing a moderator should not necessarily be part of their function. I know there is concern over the present moderator. It's been iterated that he has grabbed power, he's been in there a long time, so forth and so on. But you should never make a law for the person, you should make a law for the benefit of the community. And I still say, it should be the people electing the moderator in a general election. And I'll tell you, it's a difficult job being a moderator. I go all the way back to Earl Rose, Reuben Winokur, Tom the attorney, I can't think of his name, Bud Kruger, and of course, the present moderator, who's been there, I think, probably over 30 years. So, I think we should stick with the people electing the moderator.
This is not a law being designed around our current town moderator. No one has mentioned that. I want to be very clear about that. The moderator has done a fantastic job. He runs a good town meeting. No one has said that I don't think it's, the intent of this change is because of our current town moderator. This isn't preparing for the future when the moderator may change. And that was the intent of this idea, is having a town moderator that was responsive to the body.
Scott?
Just on a side note from David's comment, I was wondering if we maybe need to create that as an elected office, the town curmudgeon. I'd like to see that sign on your lawn.
I decline.
Mr. Chairman.
I would also say, though, it was brought up, just tonight it was brought up, that
Must have missed it.
Yes, it is. The presentation that used to be from the precinct chairs has been taken away and taken over by the moderator. So it was brought up, so let's not skirt the issue.
Okay, well, I don't think I stand corrected, but I felt
me,
like
Bill.
this discussion wasn't
Excuse me, Bill.
against the moderator.
Wrestling has,
One of the reasons that I asked that if all town meetings were town meeting times and not Robert's rules, is town meeting times gears towards the moderator a little bit, whereas Robert's rules gives a little more, we've put into place where the town meeting can question a decision by the moderator, but nobody knows about it. And there's, that 2/3 vote about a motion that came in late that we shouldn't have to, there's a lot of stuff that is in there. I think that, I agree, it shouldn't be, we feel that the current moderator has been doing some things and we should make rules because of that. I just think that one of the reasons that we're looking at this is because, again, I've been at precinct chairs where another individual and I have been trying to get town meeting, you know, we were saying, did anybody else notice that the moderator's doing the presentation for him? And a bunch of people said, hey, you're doing the presentation for him. He goes, yep, I'm already doing it. And the horse was out of the barn. I just think that if we do not have town meeting nominating the moderator, then we need to make sure that town meeting has some authority, and it needs to be known by town meeting, that they can say, Mr. Moderator, we disagree with that decision. I'd like to take a vote of 2/3, because I found out that I could have I asked the moderator at one point, this motion for the negotiations came in on Friday. Can I go to town meeting and say, we cannot vote on this? And the moderator told me, no, all you can do is get up and say, don't vote on this or vote this down. And then since I got on the charter and was looking through it, I found that, yes, I could have gotten up at town meeting and asked for a 2/3 vote to not even look at that motion. So my concern is that town meeting doesn't know the powers that it has. And I look at this as a way of saying, okay, we're going to nominate the guy that we think is going to be fair. Yes, we need a town moderator who can run a meeting, because I've seen meetings gone astray by a very weak chair or a very weak moderator. And I think that we need to find a way that we have someone who's good, but knows that he's at the purview of town meeting. He's not, taking over.
Okay, further discussion, then I think it'd be good if somebody wants to make a motion. Go ahead.
I would like to speak, Bill.
Okay, go ahead, Betsy.
Bill? Yes, when I mentioned presentation forum, it was not about this particular moderator. It was in response to something said by the Collins representatives that, what are we trying to fix? What are the problems? And so that's why I brought that up, because that was just an example there could be dozens of other things that could come up in the future. So I just wanted to give the Collins representatives an idea of one thing that I was concerned about and that I had heard of other people being concerned about. The town of Dartmouth, and I brought this up, I think, I don't know how long ago, does say that the town meeting can override any decision by the moderator, right? And I don't know if you remember my bringing it up, but unfortunately my computer is not working. I can't, for some reason my FiOS I can't get connected, so I can't look it up. But I do know that I brought this up at the time, and I can't find it right now, but I can find it for our next meeting. But it says that the town meeting by a 2/3 vote can overrule any decision by the moderator. So I just, maybe we want to put in something like that. I'm not sure. But I do feel as though I have heard over and over again, people feeling frustrated. And this is one example, but it's not about this moderator. They could be frustrated with any future moderator. So that was just an example. It was not about this moderator so much as an example. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment? Anybody want to make a motion as to whether or not to make this change in the charter? So we'll leave.
I think we didn't, okay.
Well,
Make the
the
change.
motion would be to delete this revision, if anybody wants to make it. Mr. Pizer makes the motion. Is there a second? And David Malaguti seconds it.
I'm sorry, what's the motion? I didn't hear the
It's
motion.
going to take out this provision about having the town meeting electing its own moderator.
So I just want to make sure I understand it. If we take this out, nothing changes about the moderator.
On that point, yes.
If,
Go ahead.
I think nothing changes about how the moderator is elected. The changes that were put in about, town meeting's control over the moderator, those stand. This is only about how the moderator is elected.
Well, that two-thirds thing went in the last go-around in October. Right, Bill?
No, just going to vote.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of Mr. Pizer's motion? Please raise their hand. Aye. Okay, Betsy, David, and Larry is 3. All opposed to the motion? It looks like 5-3. The motion does not carry, so the change stays in. So
Mr. Moderator, can I make a motion that we modify the language as written there to remove the member, just so shall
Right.
elect one individual as opposed to one member?
I would second that.
We changed the word member. I think everybody's in agreement with that.
I would change it to resident. A resident
Not a resident.
Go ahead.
of Plymouth.
A registered voter.
Registered voter.
Yeah.
Registered voter?
Yes.
Got it, okay. Thank you. I think the last point from Chapter 2.
Before we move on, I
Actually,
just,
the next to the last point. from
before we move
Chapter
on
2.
from that, the Collins had indicated that they thought that the way that the moderator possibly might be nominated and elected might be done in a more, less distracting way to the work at hand at a town meeting. I guess the Collins felt that that was a concern early on when they were describing. Could they look at that again?
Pat, and Mike, did you hear that question?
Meaning trying to find another way to implement this?
You noted that how we talked about it at our last meeting, we would nominate at the beginning and elect at the end, and the person would start the job in September. Start the, would take over fall town meeting, but do all the work necessary to organize fall town meeting. You were concerned, I thought you made some reference that you didn't understand, you didn't think it was a good idea to nominate in the beginning and vote at the end. If you think it was better to just do everything at the end, or?
We have to think about that. And maybe, my concern about doing it all at the end is if people are starting to get antsy at the very end, especially if it's been a contentious meeting, and people are, either in low spirits or frustrated or ready to get out, that, nominating and electing and taking care of all that as final business could be, potentially problematic. But what we can weigh that against the, the way it's here now, and maybe, come up with some thoughts on which is the best approach.
I had the same thought that at the end, it might be a little distracting.
So, Bill, were you suggesting having the election at the beginning of the next following town meeting?
No, Collins was Michael was indicating that he thought that at the end, you might be losing town meeting members, so you'd probably put it at the beginning of town meeting.
Okay, so, Mike, we wait to see what you,
We can put together
What's
some
come up?
pros and cons, about, this way creates a lame duck, this way creates potential political, we'll see what we can come up with.
okay, let's, the Finance Committee, which is on page 13, section 12, made a number of changes. It's now in that paragraph. As to who can be on the Finance Committee, how the appointments are made. Basically, it says, should a vacancy occur, describes how to fill the vacancy. Persons not registered to vote, of course, are not eligible, nor are persons public officials or town employees, but town meeting members would be eligible. I have a question, whether this is Mike or Michelle. I see the conflict of interest section is still in here. in the draft charter, 212-6, as applicable to finance committee members. Did we agree that that wasn't necessary?
I think that's correct, yeah.
So we should really strike 2-12-6. Right. Because they're already subject to conflict of interest rules at the state level. And that pretty much, that does complete the new language, the language that's in Chapter 2. There's a reference to the enforcement provision, and you're still waiting to get further feedback from Falmouth on the enforcement provision. So Mike, why don't you give us a little overview of the Select Board, Chapter 3, which is our next section, the town manager and the planning board.
Sure. So, we gave it a first read through. We flagged a couple of questions for everyone to think about, but we're also very eager to hear what's on your minds about what are some of the issues and challenges related to the executive and to planning. I guess, if there's a theme to some of the questions and comments we've raised, it is that your executive branch article contains a bit more detail than some charters. And so we would suggest spending a little time in one of the executive branch discussions, deciding whether some of the stuff that is currently in the charter might not be better as bylaws. We're not even saying change anything about the substance, just to give yourself some more flexibility, consider moving some of it to the bylaws. And the two, I think, examples we included in here, one were the qualifications for town manager, that there is a decent amount of detail in there, and that to make sure as that market for town managers is a bit, I know you just hired one, so it hopefully won't come up for a long time, but the market is challenging and fluid, and making sure that you have the flexibility without a charter change if needed when the time comes, by having it in a bylaw. And then similarly, I think I'd echo what the town manager himself had said in his own comments about Article 3, which is that the departmental level detail is pretty significant in here relative to some other charters that we've seen. And again, it does slow down the ability to potentially make changes to adapt to circumstances. So, considering that is something we would suggest. Beyond that, I think we had heard in one of your discussions, or at some point early on, there were some issues around the select board's relationship with the manager and department heads. So there's some work that could be done there. There was a note that your 328 in your charter talked about the select board meeting with other boards. We thought, and you may already be doing this, but certainly having a kind of joint board meeting specifically at the beginning of the budget process about the budget is a useful tool as part of the budget process. And then there's just a couple of other, things here and there that we'd happy to discuss as we get to. But really, again, these are just our first reactions as we read through it. We're more interested, I think, in what you all see as some of the issues you'd like to address, and we can go from there.
Yeah, the first points you made on page 6 of your latest memo was, did we strongly think that we should have language that basically says that the select board can only act through the town manager, and actually be prohibitive of them acting with respect to departments in some other fashion? And I think you asked that question, and I think that is a real concern. And we were in favor of the kind of provisions we reviewed in a few of the charters, which are very adamant and very specific, that the select board's attention should be based on visionary, long-term policy matters and not dealing with individual department heads. So if there's a way to, we definitely should be beefing up that language in the select board section. David.
I didn't know if you were waiting for the Collins to comment on this, but I would say that traditionally, in all the years that I served on the Board of Selectmen, In recent years, it was the town manager. Prior to that, it was the executive secretary, so it was a different ballgame. But under the town manager form that we've been using now since 92, whatever it was, the town manager is responsible for the operation of the town. And being in the Army like I was, and I'm sure Scott will agree, and whoever else was in the service, there is a chain of command. And you shouldn't deviate from that chain of command. You can't have 4 lieutenants or captains telling you to attack, and one captain saying, don't attack. So you got to have a logical sequence, and you got to have one person that you're responsible to. And what I always did in my tenure with the town manager, I would always clear things with the town manager. Many times, if it was a DPW-related item, Ellie Beth, Mark Sylvia, Melissa, they all said, this is your ball game, you've done it all your life, you handle it. But I always cleared it with the town manager. The selectmen should not be calling department heads, you should do this, you should do that, because then the department head's gonna say, well, who is my boss? Who do I listen to? So there needs to be a clear chain of command, and I would propose something to the effect that all management should be through the town manager, and the selectmen should not be reaching out to department heads unless they clear it with the town manager.
Yeah, Mike, that was the kind of language we were looking for, and we actually found some very strong language in a couple of the charters we reviewed. And I'll send you, I think, it might have been Bill Ricker, it was one of our Sharon, that was very, very specific.
We can come up with a couple examples from different charters if you'd like, and then you can select from them,
Right.
which feels best for.
So let's see, we'd advertised public comment for right about now, so is there public comment in the audience? Yes, Mr. Hutchinson. Do you want to turn your mic? Yep.
Is that okay? That works? I thought that we kind of covered some of the topics that you guys talked about at the last meeting. I missed the last meeting as well, Larry. But I thought that we had talked about it before, and that some of the things that Frank mentioned and that Wrestling mentioned were covered, but I wanted to just summarize those points. Frank brought up the fact that the only reason that the re-precincting working group looked the way it did is because the folks at COPC were distressed at not having been included. The legislature was not included. Likewise, Wrestling had mentioned that we had talked about other functions that that working group performed, like mapping and project management. So basically, Larry's right about the numbers. I mean, they're absolute, they happen every 10 years, and that's what matters. But it's how the group is structured, I think, that is also important. So that I believe that the town planner has more basic functional skills in his or her department for mapping and project management than the town clerk has. So some of that functionality, some of that workload could be offloaded, I think, in a model for redistricting or re-precincting. And, the point I think I made was that I think Pearl ran out of time, but this was a compressed schedule with a lot of perturbations, and so, it's not typical. But the fact is that she did run out of time because she had to do something else, and, that's a lesson to be learned about capacity, I think. So, my thought is that, rather than a working group, which is closed, and Mr. Abbott would remember that he and Mr. Layton were, not welcome at that meeting, and because it's a working group. have it be a task force or some other term that you'd use for a group that is open. And I'd like that group to be open, transparent, and inclusive. That's what I want. And I thought that was what we discussed. I think that wrestling's right. I think that's what we talked about before. So it didn't have to do necessarily with the numbers so much as how you approach the problem. And, you know, it also goes to what Bill was saying. Well, I can't remember whether it was, I can't remember who said it, but you know, you can begin a bit early. Whoever said that, you know, it might have been Mike. But the fact is that you know, you don't need to begin the process you don't need to do the process every 5 years so much as you need to get it started a year maybe before, 9 months before, whatever time frame feels right for the kind of project you think it's going to turn out to be. So, you know, that's my comment on that. Also, somebody, on a completely different topic here. You were talking about, Frank had a comment about context, essentially, for references to the record of town meeting, which I completely sympathize with Larry's point about, you know, a point-by-point record that you can go through. But I also really thought that whoever made the comment about indexing into the video was a really good idea. Because that would help a lot. Because there are places where you want to go to hear what the discussion was. And also, I had, since you're going to be going to a discussion of the overview of town manager and select board and planning board, I wanted to make a suggestion about, or put in a plug for the master plan, making the master plan for the town an enforceable document. So, you know, what that goes to is the powers of the select board vis-a-vis the powers of the planning board, and how the task list that usually is comprised in Chapter 8 of a master plan gets executed. So, you know, as you go through that discussion, I think that's a guardrail that you need to think about putting around the select board. Give them the responsibility, and that task list will have a lot better chance of getting executed, and that master plan would stand a much better chance of not ending up on somebody's shelf. Thank you for your time. Thanks.
Michelle, do we have anybody on Zoom? So, can't read the name below. Was it Kim? Ken Christofori? Okay, why don't you bring in Mr. Christofori in?
Hello. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I know you just started touching on the select board, and I'll have a lot more comments. I guess you'll be doing it more next week probably. But for this, is what we just touched on so far, is I definitely agree with Mr. Malaguti about the select board leaving the town manager to run the departments. I watched part of the selectmen's meeting last week when they were talking about opening up the beach, which always seems to be a contentious issue. And one of the select board members made a comment about wanting to open the beach when in fact it couldn't be opened, and because of the beach management plan. And there was no one there from a specific department that could answer the question. So my point being is that if the selectmen are going to bring up specific issues at that time, there should be a department head there that can answer the question correctly. Otherwise, the selectmen should stay out of it and just let the town manager handle those situations. So that's all I have to say right now, but as time progresses, I guess you're gonna be talking more about the selectmen, and I definitely have more to say about them. Because I'm speaking with people, we're not very happy the way the select board is operating right now. And you probably heard that more than once. But, right now, that's the only issue I can comment on, because it's all you've spoken about. But, so I'll be talking with more of you, next week as you progress through your, review of the select board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christopher. Actually, we'll be discussing it this Thursday, 3 nights from now?
Great, I'll be there.
Good, great. Thank you. Michelle, anyone else on Zoom? Okay, looking back at your checklist submitted by Collins, we discussed the first item, which was the fact that the select board should act only through the town manager, and you're going to look for some stronger language for that than we have currently in our charter, because we definitely want to hammer that point home. The second point was, you say it's common in many towns that the select board meetings with the other elected boards be described as explicitly being part of the budget process. Can you explain that a bit? I mean, when they meet with the school committee, that's like part of the budget process, or the COPC? Well, what's the advantage in stating that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, many towns they sometimes call it a tri-board meeting if it's the select board, the FinCom, and the school committee, or something to that effect. At the very start of the budget process, where usually the finance director outlines initial some revenue projections, brings into it information about baked in costs that are coming this year, whether because of collective bargaining or because of debt service, or basically presents so all of the boards are starting from the same information, from the same starting point, and can begin the discussions of what the budget is going to look like from the same place. So all we're saying is that that you've got this. Where did it go? We've got this nice language here about the select board meeting jointly with the school committee, planning board, and other elected boards for the purpose of sharing information at least twice a year. Schedule the joint meetings, which shall be held at least twice a year. All that's good. The only thing we were thinking is that, and actually, to be honest, now that I'm saying this, I don't know if you've got it already in your budget process section. I have to go skip ahead here. But that many places explicitly make a multi-board meeting part of the very early stages of the annual budget process.
Is there any comment on that from us, members of the commission?
No, but the only comment I have is I agree. I think that that as we begin the budget process, that it's important to have the finance committee, the school committee, and the board of selectmen and the finance department.
No, I can't hear you.
But can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just agreeing. I think it's a good idea. It's important to have strong language in there that indicate that the beginning of the budget process will begin with the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Finance Department beginning that process on a level playing field.
Okay, Mike, can you give us some language there, a future meeting to look at for that point? Thank you. You also made some comments regarding town manager qualifications and how specific we should be in the charter, and whether it would be more prudent to put those into a bylaw. And I think you touched upon it in your opening comment. I assume you think that the charter is not the right place to put very specific current qualifications. It'd be better to refer to a bylaw.
That's correct. Yep. And I have no objection. The language you've got there is fine. It's just, it'd be better to leave yourself the flexibility the next time you have to hire a manager, so that your hands are not absolutely tied to the 5 years of full-time paid experience and so on and so forth. That if, let's say let's say 10 years from now, you're starting the next hiring process, for a town manager, the world is very different for whatever reason, and you want to be able to consider someone with 3 years, or you want to be able to consider someone that has significant experience managing a large, nonprofit or whatever it is. That it'd be much easier to change that by bylaw than having to address it in the charter. So the recommendation would be to basically, delete, delete this from the charter, and then in your report, recommend the town meeting at its next opportunity, add this in as a bylaw.
Okay, that's 3-4-2. We already discussed 3-2-6 and 3-2-8. You mentioned in 3-4-4, there's no provision for an acting town manager for periods shorter than 30 days. Is that just a omission in our charter?
Could be, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. Many charters have separate paragraphs, one intending for a temporary town manager in the situation where the manager's on vacation, or the manager is, off for some short period of time, and then a separate longer one if the manager is not coming back, so that there can be, there's an interim while the search is going on. So we can give you some examples of ways of kind of reconstructing it to include both of those if you'd like.
You mentioned that the enumerated list of powers and duties could be made cleaner by being grouped by under subheadings. Was that just with respect to the manager or various department heads?
I was just referring to the manager there. So, you've got in 3-5-1 under the town manager shall, you've got A through V of sub-bullets there, all kind of compressed together. And, we're not saying you need to change any of it. It would just be, I think, easier for the public to follow what the town manager's explicit responsibilities, authorities, duties are if these were grouped. So the appointment related authorities of the town manager are, and then A through whatever, through A, B, C, D, whatever, regrouping them, just for clarity. I mean.
Or in a separate bylaw?
No, well, you could leave it, I would leave them here even, just reorganizing them so that it's easier to follow.
So the duties are more in the charter, whereas the qualifications would be in the bylaw.
That's the way it's commonly done, yes.
Right. One point you raised, I haven't heard it discussed yet here, let's see if we can deal with it, is should the planning board be appointed by the select board or elected by the townwide election? Is there a comment? They just raised it as certainly an item to consider. Is there any feeling about that one way or the other? Should the planning board be appointed or elected?
I have strong feelings about it.
Frank, what?
I think, well, in an ideal world, if you could appoint the right people that are following the master plan and stick to it and are, whatever. I think that the opportunity at least exists by electing the planning board of having people from the community whose interest is basically the interest of the community, and not a specific interest and not a specific plan, but one that's more, in some ways, it echoes what you want in the town meeting in terms of that kind of representation of the community. So I would definitely be in favor of keeping it an elected board. There are other issues that I want to revisit in the planning board and in the planning staff and things like that, and in the building inspector. I don't know if they can be addressed in the charter, but I would definitely be in favor of keeping an elected planning board.
Well, I was going to ask the Collins team if they could, if they know of any other charters that have a much stronger section that puts planning at the very top in terms of importance. I don't think our charter really does planning a real service. And you can take a look and see what, if there are any models we can take from towns that, I mean, certainly Plymouth should have planning right at the very top. See if there's something that you can find that might be a good thing to look at,
Take a look.
Yeah, Mr.
as
Chairman.
well as how the master plan works.
Mr. Chairman.
Charter that we put in effect 20 years ago said all these things were supposed to be in accordance with the master plan, and none of that has ever been followed. So we got to do more than just write some words in the charter.
Mr. Chairman.
Nope.
I agree. I think that we need to look at this section of the charter as it pertains to the planning department and look at how we can strengthen the language around that process, the planning process, and requiring it to be done in a timely manner. But also, there are other components of the planning department that be interesting to, once we get into that section, that we are giving the planning department the significance that it does hold here in town. Plymouth is the fastest growing town. In Plymouth, we've brought on more residential and commercial development than any other town. We're consuming open space at a rapid pace. It's driving our cost of services. So I always look at the planning department as the tap roots for the town, that the decisions that are made on the planning board level can affect the future cost that incurs to live here in Plymouth. So I really think we need to spend some time on that planning department and how we can make it more, give it the strength that it needs to make the right decisions.
Mr. Chairman?
David.
I think also, we did it in the past, many years ago, and it's kind of drifted away. But there should be, I don't know if it should be 2, 3, or 4 meetings a year, but there should be joint meetings with the planning board and the board of selectmen to get everybody on the same page.
Wesley?
Yeah, I agree. I think planning board should be more involved in town meeting. I think that's one of the groups that I think town meeting should be asking more questions and
Right.
taking to task and saying, hey,
There's probably no board that plays a lesser role in town meeting currently than the planning
right,
board.
exactly. There's special town meeting. I personally am gonna say, what's the planning board on this? Where are you?
Right.
Are you gonna give Vio those 60 lots, or what's your future, look at this? I think that, this is a prime opportunity in the charter to look at the planning board and give them a little more, I don't know
No, I
what the word
totally
is.
agree, Rusty.
Yeah.
I think we should put some real importance, teeth, emphasis, whatever you want to call it, in the planning section.
And it should, and like Dave just indicated, I think the planning board and the select board should meet quarterly on the progress of that plan that's been put together, the master plan that we have. And then and the completion of that master plan, we should be looking for suggestions on bylaw changes to make that plan a reality. Because far too many times we plan, and the thing sits on a file cabinet. There's no incentivization to get the petitioner to come before the plan and embrace these things that are in this plans. We have some really interesting plans. I mean, the planning department has, in my duration in this involvement, over 22 years, they put a lot of time and effort into the planning process, but it's not being incorporated into the permitting process, and the only way to do that is to require some language in the charter that says that as a result of this master plan, recommendations will be taken to town meeting for bylaw changes.
Other comment? So Mike, could you folks take a hard look at the planning? See how other towns have handled master plan? Again, Plymouth, we have it in there, but it doesn't seem to have any emphasis. It's not, we're looking for really a strengthened master plan provision.
Take a look. I will say, and I don't know if this will make you feel better or worse, but many municipalities that we deal with, towns and cities, are frustrated by the same issue, wherein a lot of effort goes into developing a master plan that has community buy-in, and a lot of work has gone into it, and then it's kind of ignored in the actual planning process. So you're not alone in experiencing those frustrations.
But perhaps we could add a provision in the zoning process that requires a finding that it's consistent with the master plan. I mean, actually build it into the process. It will be a question asked
I think,
and answered.
Mr. Chairman, also, I think we had a discussion earlier, I don't know where it's appearing in the charter, where we had a master plan enforcement effort. I think that's really critical. I think it's saying the same thing that you're saying about additional verbiage, but there's many instances that come upon the planning board where,
I was thinking of that, Frank, but we need kind of a special way to enforce the master plan. You know, filing a complaint with the town clerk and a response, I mean, that maybe doesn't really work. We need another enforcement mechanism to come up with it.
To Mr. Chairman, to another enforcement to make sure the planning process happens in a timely manner? Okay. And then the other thought is, as a result of this planning process, how would one incorporate making some reference in the town charter that not only will there be a master plan process, but at the conclusion, there'll be recommendations for bylaw changes accordingly, so that it's somewhere there that says this planning process is not about preparing a document and putting it on a table, but actually, at the end of the planning process, come up with changes to the zoning bylaw changes.
Okay. So we've got a lot of homework to do. Sounds like it. Betsy?
Yes, the master plan was something that the Open Space Committee often referenced, both to the Finance Committee and to town meeting. And we brought forward land that we would like to see go into conservation. And I think that both the Finance Committee and town meeting members don't have a working knowledge of the master plan. I'm not sure how that could be incorporated, if at all, but having the Finance Committee somehow reference the master plan whenever that's appropriate, I think would be important. And then for that to be also referenced at town meeting, so that page number and chapter, et cetera, of master plan is referenced both to the Finance Committee as well as to town meeting, so that it becomes a more important document than it is now.
Okay, we will be continuing this discussion on Thursday night here, and hopefully we'll have a little more meat to consider regarding the planning department and the Chapter 3. And the town manager's already given us his comments, and most of them were in Chapter 3, and I believe you have those changes that he's proposing. So this is a good point where we can pick up on Thursday. Is everybody or anybody read the minutes from our last meeting, May 26th, that Michelle prepared?
I'll move them.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of May 26th. Any opposition? All in favor of approving said minutes?
Abstain.
Abstain. Mr. Pfizer abstains. And we have an affirmative vote of everybody else except Mr. Pfizer's abstained, so the minutes of May 26th have been approved. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? New business, Michelle has updated our calendar. It's in your packet for meetings in June. We're meeting on this coming Thursday.
Where's this meeting on Thursday?
There's a meeting on the 9th of June. The next meeting will be then the 23rd, which is a
Mr. Chairman,
Thursday.
the one on the 9th, where is that meeting?
Right here.
Okay, I thought it was in green, so it
Yeah,
was.
the next, all the meetings in June are here as hybrid meetings. The 9th, the
I would
23rd,
like to ask,
and then the last one is the 27th of June. They're all here. Yes, Betsy?
I would like to ask Michelle to send the calendar as a digital, by email, so that, we can have a copy in our email as well as in our records.
You talk about the schedule.
The calendar schedule, yes.
Right, okay.
I'm
Any
not
other,
here to get my packet.
right. So, any other discussions? Then I think we are done for this evening.
Motion to adjourn, Mr.
The
Chairman.
motion's been made to adjourn. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.